Hello, everybody, and welcome to tonight's forum. My name's Jennifer Canis, and I'm a principal lawyer here at Maurice Blackburn, and I look after our social justice practice. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you all here tonight and really to say how much we love Anika Liebel and how much we value the partnership that we had with Anika Liebel. I was saying to someone just tonight how it's a really genuine friendship and partnership between Maurice Blackburn and Anika Liebel in a situation where we don't do tenancy law, and so it's really a partnership because we value the work that each of us do and that we bring real synergies. So we're really happy to continue the partnership with Anika Liebel and to help them put on programs like tonight's. Can I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands we're meeting on tonight and pay my respects to elders both past and present and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. Tonight is a night that is all about renters' rights, and some of the terrific speakers that you will hear about will really, I think, open our minds to a whole lot of new ideas and have a really fruitful discussion. I'm going to pass over to Noel to let him do some more fulsome introductions, but thank you all for coming. I hope you enjoy the evening, enjoy the hospitality, and have a great discussion. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Jen, and just also want to thank Maurice Blackburn for generously hosting this event with us in this amazing space. What Jen said is so spot on. We every time we work with Maurice Blackburn, anything we do with them, it's just so clear how strong their commitment to social justice is. Like she said, they're not doing tenancy law, but they really care about this cause. And so just, a big, I'm very grateful for being able to be partners for so long and look forward to much more as well. Now, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the land of which we're meeting. That's the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. Also extend that to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. This land has always been home. Long before tenancy law, tribunals and dispute resolution, First Nation peoples had practices governing how people related to each other and related to country, and how they shared and cared for place. And so today we're here to talk about resolving disputes between in the rental system. And as we do that, I want us to remember that the oldest unresolved dispute about home on this continent is the dispossession of First Nations people. That dispute isn't abstract, or it's not over. That continues in the fact that sovereignty was never ceded. So in Victoria, the treaty process and truth-telling are really important steps. And that's, they recognise that the way the land was taken, government and used, has caused harm, and that justice requires more than just words. And it means listening to First Nations leadership on what home and self-determination looks like in practice so that we can shift our systems accordingly. As we talk about housing justice today, I invite everyone to keep asking how we can confront that injustice and move towards something that's more than just, something more just, knowing that any vision for housing justice is incomplete if First Nations people cannot live on their lands in culturally appropriate homes with real control over the decisions that affect them and their homes. So with that in mind, I once again pay respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and hope that this conversation today moves us closer to a future where everyone has a home and where the oldest disputes over this land can be resolved with justice and also with dignity. And thank you everyone for being here. Welcome to the 2025 Housing Justice Forum. I want to start by mentioning who's in the room, because I think that in itself says a lot about where Victoria is in its rental journey. 1/4 of us are senior leaders in the community sector. So the people who are leading the work at the coalface of housing stress and homelessness. We've also got 1/4 of the audience from government, and that's leadership from Consumer Affairs Victoria, VCAT, Legal Aid, the Rental Commissioner, Departments of Justice and Government Services. And then on this panel, we've got a renter with lived experience, we've got the Real Estate Institute of Victoria, Consumer Policy Research Centre. As you may have seen, unfortunately, the Minister for Consumer Affairs, Nick Stakos, is unable to come today due to a last-minute unforeseen circumstance. But he's asked the Deputy Secretary of Consumer Affairs, Lisa Gandolfo, to deliver his speech on his behalf. So we're very glad that you're joining us. Thank you, Lisa. And I want to mention this mix of people, community, government, industry, because we're all in the same room about to have a really honest conversation. And I think that's an essential ingredient if we are serious about achieving our shared vision. And that vision is a Victoria where all renters can thrive in their homes. It's not just scrape by or just have a roof, but actually thrive and put down roots and plan a life and feel safe knowing that their home supports their health, their family, their future. When it comes to the focus of today, dispute resolution between a renter and their landlord or agent, we are shooting for a rental system that is fair, where renters can live with peace of mind and with confidence. In that rental system we're working towards, renters can trust that their rights will be upheld without constantly having to fight for them or fear of losing their homes. The system does the job in the background so renters can focus on just living their lives. And if a maintenance request goes unanswered, it's just a matter of reporting it and then just carrying on, because they know that the regulator will step in if the repair's not done promptly, if a landlord breaches their rights, if there's a bogus bond claim or an unlawful eviction. It's not a big deal because renters trust that there is a simple, quick process that's going to put things right and they can handle it on their own without spending money on a lawyer or going through the stress of trying to find a community legal centre to support them. That's what a fair and functioning rental system looks like. And what it feels like, that renters have rights on paper that are upheld in practice, and in the rare cases that they're not, the renter's able to deal with the issue, deal with their landlord openly and confidently that they're going to be treated fairly, without needing a lawyer at all. And that's the future that we're working towards, a future where Anika doesn't actually need to exist. And we have a long way to go, but we're also not starting from zero. We've already made huge progress over the past decade. And when I say we, I mean everyone in this room who has put in a huge amount of work into this cause. So Victoria now has some of the strongest rental laws in the country, and that's made possible by the sustained efforts of the community sector, by a state government that is taking action, and most of all by renters who've gone above and beyond to share their stories in the hope of a fairer system. So last year's Housing Justice Forum happened on a momentous day. On the morning of the forum, Victorian government announced several fantastic rental reforms, including changes to the rental bonds system that Anika had recommended in our Broken Bonds report just 4 months earlier. A few hours ago, those reforms were passed into law. And so I think that's, right. I think that captures the second ingredient that we're going to need to realise our vision, which is courage. Courage looks different depending on where you're standing, but we know that it's essential everywhere. And for the community sector, courage means telling it like it is, reporting what we see, what renters tell us, even when it's uncomfortable, because when we shy away from the truth of lived experiences, it's the renters who pay the price. When we speak on behalf of renters without going out proactively seeking to understand their needs or their experiences, we're missing the opportunity to create a system that is actually serving their interests. And for government, courage means really listening to and facing those uncomfortable truths that we're telling, and being willing to make the hard choices, even if they're not the easiest or the most popular. For industry, courage means recognising that change is needed, that working together towards a future that is fair is what we all need to do. And so, and lastly, there's the courage of renters themselves. And these are the renters who tell their stories, talk to the media, who contribute to a report like we released last week, Unrepresented, And they do so at an enormous personal cost because they don't have the time. You know, they are risking being marked as a difficult tenant in a tight rental market, and yet they still choose to speak up. And it's not just for themselves, it's to make things better for the renters that come after them. And the fact that you're all here, the fact that many in this room are deeply engaged in this work and the work that Anika is doing over the past year tells me that we are being courageous, but we also acknowledge that more needs to be done. Our Broken Bonds report showed what can happen when we collaborate and we can and act with courage. And we have similar hopes for our unrepresented report on VCAT and Rental Dispute Resolution Victoria, which lays out what happens when a renter tries to enforce their rights in a system that doesn't sufficiently account for the power imbalance. It also shows that when renters get just basic legal support, the outcomes and the confidence dramatically improve. And so that work has already prompted government to lean in. CAV, VCAT, the offices of Minister Stakos and the Parliamentary Secretary for Renting, that willingness to attend these forums, to listen, to work together, that's not something that I take for granted. So I feel very privileged to be able to do this work at this moment in time and to be leading Anika with the support of people like you in this room. Through the funding from the Victorian Legal Services Board for the Unrepresented project, that's not just winning cases for renters, but that's building legal capability so that next time they feel confident to assert their rights early and independently. So that's the type of system that we should be aiming for. One where the default is not find a lawyer, but one that empowers renters to assert the rights themselves. So before we move on, I just want to take a moment to recognise the work that's being done by the people in the room, but particularly the work that the renters are doing, who have stuck their neck out to improve things for other people. So please join me in a round of applause for everyone contributing to housing justice. All right, and so look, before we move on, a few things to mention. Toilets are located back near the where you came in from the lift, so you'll be able to see it if you need it when you go back that way. Today's session is being video recorded and photographed. If you would not like to appear in this material, please let someone from Anika know. We'll make sure that doesn't happen. And in terms of the agenda, we're next going to hear from the Deputy Secretary for Consumer Affairs, Lisa Gandolfo, on behalf of the Minister for Consumer Affairs. And then we'll move into a panel discussion, which will go for about an hour and a half or so, and that'll include time for questions and answers. So please welcome Lisa Gandolfo to the stage.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and thanks so much for having me here today. And I do apologise for the Minister for Consumer Affairs for not being able to make it this evening. And I'm probably not a substitute for the Minister for Consumer Affairs, but equally extremely happy to be here with you this evening. So thanks for having me. I'd like to also acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we're meeting on, the Wurundjeri people, and I'd like to pay my respect to the Wurundjeri people, their elders past and present, and any Aboriginal First Nation stakeholders that we have or attendees that we have in the room with us this evening. I'm really deeply grateful for enduring connection to country and for the cultural knowledge that First Nations people continue to share with me and share with my team so that we can continue to think about that and embed that in the work that we do. I'm also pleased to acknowledge our hosts and distinguished guests at this evening's event. Thank you so much, Noel, Chief Executive Officer, Anika Legal, and founder. So it's really great to see you again tonight and to listen to the panel that you've put together. I'm really happy to be here for that. Erin Turner, the CEO of Consumer Policy Research Centre, also here with us. Jacob Kane, Director and immediate past President of the Board of REIV. Great to see you too. And I also want to thank Maurice Blackburn Lawyers for generously providing tonight's venue. Thank you. All right, so it's great to be here at the release of this really important report, Unprecedented Barriers to Justice for Self-Represented Renters at VCAT. The first-hand experiences captured in this report shine a light on the very real challenges renters face when trying to navigate formal dispute resolution processes. The stories speak to long-standing reality. Too many renters have felt disadvantaged by systems that have become cumbersome, overburdened, slow, and both financially and emotionally draining for those participating in those systems. We also know that renters have felt the balance of power skewed against them. We've heard clearly that many rental providers have found also that VCAT services are falling short of what they need. And these shared challenges have strengthened government's resolve and my work with you to drive meaningful improvements to how rental disputes are managed and resolved. It's just so important that we get reports like this, that we continue to hear from you about how things are working so that we can continue to build on our system. So our role in DGS, Department of Government Services, we play a policy role, but we work really closely with VCAT and we work really closely with advocates. We try to work really closely with the sector. And what we're trying to do, like you, is remove barriers created by traditional models of dispute resolution, empower renters to confidently exercise their rights, and above all, deliver fair, transparent and accessible services to everyone involved. So we're really proud of the introduction of RDRV, Rental Dispute Resolution Victoria, and I know many are in the room from RDRV this evening. And it was introduced in June this year, and I think it really reflects our joint ambition for a dispute service that will resolve rental matters in a much more fair and efficient way. RDRV was designed to reduce uncertainty for renters and rental providers, lighten the load on VCAT and deliver outcomes that are fair and fast. Importantly, it's free, ensuring renters aren't prevented from pursuing their rights because of cost. So early evidence shows that RDRV is making a difference. Straightforward cases are now being resolved in just 2 to 4 weeks, and this is a significant improvement on traditional wait times that's reducing stress and uncertainty for people involved. And we know that speed's important, speed matters, but fairness also matters. A fast decision is really only useful if it's accurate, transparent and consistent with renters' rights. So for RDRV to succeed, it must remain a forum where renters feel genuinely empowered to assert their rights, a trusted place to turn when issues can't be resolved directly with their rental provider. And I loved what you said, Noel, about like they just want to get on and live their life and know that they're in a system where they can raise an issue and it just gets taken care of. It's not going to take a really long time and they're going to feel really stressed. So I can really relate to those words. The early data is really promising. We've seen more renters initiate cases through RDRV than we have before. And RDRV reframes rental disputes. It centres on early engagement and problem solving rather than that adversarial dynamic that often characterises a tribunal or a court process. Qualitative insights, like those in the Anika legal report and ongoing data, will continue to guide improvements and ensure that RDRV remains effective, fair and accountable. So we're learning more all the time, testing and trialling more all the time, hearing feedback all the time and adapting to that. RDRV, it's still in its early days. We are really encouraged by the results, but we do have to remember it is just the beginning, it's not the end. We should always continue to improve, and we know there's more to do, both in dispute resolution in dispute resolution, but also in the whole rental tenancy ecosystem as a whole. We want the whole system to work together really cohesively, so we know we've got a lot to do. Victorian law reform, it is a really exciting day. We did have some laws that started today. Victoria has now the strongest rental protections in the country. Yes. And that's really due to most of you in this room. I've been in the consumer space only for a little over a year, so I can't credit myself for that, but I'm definitely going to credit all of you for that. Your advocacy, your bravery, your courage, coming forward with your stories, continue to advocate. It's really fantastic because it's got us to where we are today. These reforms are really at the heart of Victoria's housing statement and reflect the vision we have for fair, accessible and equitable rental market here in Victoria. And the introduction of RDRV builds on a decade of sustained reform. So it's not a short-term coming, it's a long-term coming, and we're really getting there. And that's just going to make, housing for Victorians safer and fairer. So as I said, there was the latest suite of renting reforms started today, announced a year ago today here, and started today. I got a text in the middle of the day. I was very excited. All reforms on rental bidding are now, all forms of rental bidding are now banned. Notice periods for rent increases have been extended, and we've got no fault evictions are in the dustbin. They're gone. No more of them. Minimum standards for rental properties are now making a real difference. Renters can rightly expect to live in homes that are comfortable, energy efficient and safe. And from today, rental properties cannot be advertised unless they already meet these standards at the point of advertising. We're delighted, we've delivered 150 renting reforms since 2021, which is enormous. And that's clear evidence of this government's commitment to continuous improvement, and I'm so happy to be supporting them in that. More rental reforms will be commencing in the next month, including to standardise rental applications and limit the information that can be asked of prospective renters, and to strengthen excessive rent increase investigations. And the legislation that just passed the other week will go further. Rental providers will soon have to provide evidence when making bond claims. This reform directly follows Anika Legal's important broken bonds report, exposing the impact of dubious bond claims on renters. Our rent portable bond scheme will allow rental households to transfer their bond from one property to the next. We know Anika Legal and many of you in this room also supported that scheme and bringing that scheme in. So I'm looking forward to delivering it for you next year. Portable bonds will be a game changer for fairness and affordability for renters. It's a real win-win for everyone, actually, for rental providers, for renters, because rental providers also can have their bonds guaranteed. So it's just really easy transition to your next home. And we'll continue this program of reforms. We'll continue to look for improvements. We'll continue to hear from you about more and more reforms to really make this housing system, this residential tenancy system, the best in Australia. Let's make it the best in the world. Why not? And I'm really, really proud to be delivering that work on behalf of all of you and for Victorian Government. What's really important is that we measure the success of the reforms. We shouldn't just do them without knowing how much we've invested and if it's actually working. So to measure the success of the reforms, we rely on insights and experiences from the community. We try to measure our investment, really understand which part of what we're doing and changing is having an impact, drive more of that. And we're going to do a lot of evaluation, so we'll involve you in that coming up as well, because I think evaluating and proving your success just gets you more really good reform. So that is really the end of what I wanted to say. I'm so happy to be here tonight, really encouraged to see you all here, continuing to work together with us in government. I'm really pleased to be working really closely with VCAT in the early establishment of RDRV and continue to improve RDRV. And I'm really super excited also to hear from people who have experienced the system for themselves. So I really look forward to hearing you on the panel. Your feedback has been a huge impact and will continue to be a really meaningful in continuing to change the system in Victoria. So in closing, I'd like to commend Anika Legal in producing Unprecedented, the report, and for your ongoing advocacy and service to renters across the community. And thank you for having me here this evening.
I just want to thank all of you so much for being here. There was Joanne is a renter. She's recently shared her experience with the media and also in the unrepresented report. And so some of you might be aware of a story, but I'm really grateful for you to be here. Earlier this year, we released a report called the Too Hot, Too Cold, Too Costly report. And in that, we served a client who had the client was a single parent refugee, had a couple of kids. One of them had special needs, and there was like a water leak in the house, and it ended up being really damaging to their kids' health. And so they went through the VCAT process. They begged the landlord to fix it. They weren't doing it. Ultimately, had no choice but to move out. And through that process, they still kept advocating for that repair to be made, even when they had already found alternate accommodation. And the real estate agent said, like, you know, why are you doing this? Why do you care? You're leaving. And she said, because if I don't do it, it's going to be someone else who has to do it. And I think that I respect that so much, because that's someone who doesn't care just about themselves. It cares about justice and the other people. And I extend that respect to Joanne, who's been through a really difficult situation, as we'll hear, but has taken the time and spent the extra energy to be able to push things forward for this course. So thank you very much, Joanne, for being here.
It's my pleasure. Hi, everyone.
Okay, and so Erin Turner, CEO of the Consumer Policy Research Centre, which produces some of the most insightful, useful research on renting, and I think that's been like really pivotal in a bunch of the reforms that have come through. And some of you may also know that there were some pretty groundbreaking consumer policy reforms that came through last year, which were a long time in the making. Erin was absolutely instrumental in those. So she's really pushing social justice forward. So thank you, Erin, so much for being here and for the work you do. Jacob, thank you also for being here. Jacob's the outgoing CEO at our Real Estate Institute of Victoria. And when I first met Jacob, like, to be frank, I was very pleasantly surprised by how much we agreed on. I think especially a lot of the underlying beliefs and the narratives that we agreed needed to be changed if we are going to become a nation, or be that nation where everyone has a place to call home. And for these, huge cultural shifts that we need to happen, we need all sides of the issue to be at the table. And so I'm really thankful as well, Jacob, for you to be here. So can I have a round of applause for the panel? All right, look, Joanne, would love to start with you. You've been through a lot of dispute resolution, or disputes, and I would just love to hear the story. In my speech, I talked about sort of what the vision is, what I hope we can all get behind of that rental system where, that's everyone can thrive in their home, and that's how we resolve these disputes. There's just like a feeling of confidence and peace of mind for renters who can just get on with it. That's the two. Let's hear about sort of where we're at now in certain situations. Joanne.
Thanks, Noel. Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here to share my story. So I am a corporate executive. I'm 51. I am a single mum of 3 teenage boys. I grew up in Perth and I moved to Melbourne probably 15 years ago. So my parents are in aged care in Perth, and I moved across to Melbourne for work. That was about 15 years ago. About 6 years ago, I found myself in the middle of a divorce or a separation. And whilst I had been a homeowner and a landlord, I then found myself in the Victorian rental market. My boys are 14, 16 and 18. So that's not easy on its own, but then to be finding a rental property was, another challenge, especially with their growing bodies, and clearing out the pantry weekly, as you can imagine. So 3 years ago, I rented a property in Melbourne East for $1,000 a week, and I paid that on time every time for the 3 years. Late last year, the agent, Dallas Craig, suggested that the rent be increased by $120 per week. So at that time, with 21 maintenance items outstanding, I suggested that perhaps $120 was a little too much, and that perhaps we'd just go with $50 increase. I acknowledged that the property had increased in value, probably, but there was a lot to be done, and that we were sort of managing as tenants. So I suggested that $50 increase per week would be appropriate, and they agreed to it. So great. One of those maintenance items was the cornice in my son's bedroom falling on him at 3 o'clock in the morning, and him spending 84 days on the lounge room floor for that cornice to be repaired. Obviously, it had to be made. It was an older house, etc. So that was great. Late last year, I continued to pay the rent at $1,050 a week. And then on the 29th of May of this year, which was a Friday night at 5 o'clock, sorry, Noel. Sorry. I received a notice to vacate. So not a phone call, not an email, not a knock on the door, no heads up that we might be going to, we're thinking of selling the property. And so the very next morning, I collected boxes off the Facebook Marketplace, and I went to my first 2 open for inspections. So I was determined. I was given 60 days notice. The old guy that owned the property but had never lived in it had passed away, and his daughters were preparing to sell the property. So at that time it was 60 days notice, and I'm very glad to hear, Lisa, that it's now 90, because that would have really helped. So over the next 50 days, I attended 38 inspections and applied for 11 properties. I extended the search from St Kilda to Moorabbin, and was only restricted really because my kids still needed to get to school, to high school. So I extended the search from a 4-bedroom to a 3-bedroom to a 2-bedroom, and spoke to the teenage boys, the 14 and 16-year-old, about moving back into bunk beds, which, they hadn't been in for years and years and years. But they were comfortable. I said, if that's the only house that I can find, then that's what we'll need to do. And they were sort of okay with that. So at 50 days, I was absolutely distraught. And I thought, I'm not going to be able to move out. I've got 10 days to move, a 4-bedroom by 2-bathroom home. I haven't even found a property or been approved for it. I haven't signed the lease. Most of my belongings were packed by this stage, and the garden was mulch ready. And I thought, I'm just not going to be able to move. I was absolutely distraught. At this point, I'd been hospitalised twice with stress-related symptoms that were just not to do with anything other than sort of racing heart rate, and really there was no diagnosis. It was literally just stress. One night I was laying in bed, and I was, wasn't able to sleep, and I was doom scrolling, and an advert popped up for Anika Legal, and I thought, there's no harm in trying. So I filled in the contact form, and finally fell asleep. The next morning, I had an email from what I call my Anika angels. And I could not have got through this process without them, and the support that they provided me, not only from a legal perspective, but genuine care and kindness. I can never repay them, and Noel for their services. And I don't dismiss their legal qualifications by calling them angels. They're incredibly smart and very clever, but also very kind and empathetic, and for that I'll be forever grateful. So I'm not sure if I'm allowed to name them, but my angels prepared submissions, prepared an email for me to send to the agent, asking them or telling them that I was unable to vacate and that I might need a bit of additional time. I was trying. I had all the evidence for the 38 properties I'd inspected and the 11 that I'd applied for. I had photos of the boxes of all my belongings packed. By this stage, I'd rehomed my 2 dogs that I foster from Australian Border Force. They're sniffer dogs, so I foster them for the Australian government. I'd given away my 18-year contract employment because I thought maybe that was the problem, and I got a full-time job at half salary. It was still $200,000 a year, but apparently that wasn't enough. And I just didn't know what else I could do. So I emailed Jealous Craig and said, I'm not able to move from the property, but I'm trying my best, and I'm ready to move as soon as I can land a property. And the return email was a notice to attend at VCAT. Not a phone call, not an email, not a knock on the door, absolutely nothing. So the Anika Angels prepared my submissions brilliantly for my first hearing at VCAT, and the member was absolutely supportive and heard my story. And one of the issues or one of the concerns that we raised at VCAT is that perhaps the notice wasn't valid, that the house didn't need to be sold with vacant possession, and perhaps it could be sold with me still as a tenant, and perhaps the new owners might have wanted to continue renting the property even for a short period of time. So the member suggested that the agent get legal advice, and in doing so gave me another 30 days in order to find a property. I was so grateful for that. So at 30 days, I still couldn't find a property. I had more evidence of inspections and applications, and I attended back at VCAT for the second time. I had a different member this time, and it was a very different experience. The member said to me, heard my story. I read through my submissions again. The member deemed the notice as valid, that the owner had, or the estate had, an opportunity to sell or had a right to sell the property with vacant possession on the basis of painting and doing some minor repairs. And they said to prepare to put my children in foster care, and that there was a 30-day possession notice provided. So at that stage, I had to have a conversation with my children. The 14 and 16-year-old were starting to think about what they would want to take as far as possessions into foster care, and I would rent a one-bedroom unit if I could. Probably I had more chance of that with my 18-year-old son, as he wasn't eligible for foster care. The very next day, Saturday morning, I attended open for inspection in Bentley East, and I was successful in being given the lease on that property. I asked for a 2-year lease, and I didn't give any insight as to the experience I'd been through, and they would only grant a 1-year lease with an option to extend later down the track. So 7 days later, my sons and I moved ourselves out of that property, and we've recently returned the bond. So that's my story. It feels like a dream. I can't believe I've been through that. I don't know what more I could have done as a corporate executive with a 3-year perfect rental history. I've paid on time every time. I had the bond saved ready for the new property. I'd been to, I dressed appropriately for inspection in case that mattered. I built relationship with the agents at all the inspections because I saw the same ones in the same area every Saturday morning. I left work twice a week, making excuses to go to inspections. I wrote letters about how I'd maintain the property. I don't know what more I could have done, but I finally moved. Thank you, Noel. Oh, you've got a mic.
I've heard your story, summaries of your story, but never from you directly. Look, I'm just so relieved that
I am too.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing the story, because God, I'm just so sorry that you had to go through that.
Thank you. Thanks.
I guess thinking about it, someone in your position who is going through this and doing absolutely everything right, I think going well and above and beyond, and then still having the decision be that you should look at foster care. It's just so crazy. Who is safe if that's happening? And so I think part of the process was working with Anika, and I guess having gone through that experience now, how do you feel? How do you feel about that experience? But also, how would you feel about doing it again? Especially do you feel like you could do it again yourself?
Yeah, I do think that I could do it myself. I represented myself at VCAT both times, but heavily supported by both Anika angels. The submissions were written brilliantly, but I also was able to speak with the principal lawyer and have a briefing. And, as much as I was intimidated to speak with them, they brilliantly prepared me what to say, where I was able to interrupt the member, and what I needed to make sure I said in that hearing. The only reason that I wouldn't use their services again is because others need them. And because I've been through it, I would really try to do it myself and leave their services for others.
That's very selfless of you. There is a lot of just really unfair stuff in that experience. Was there anything that stood out to you as the most unjust, or the thing that aggravated you the most?
Yeah, so I'm a change transformation specialist. So I work with large brands transforming their people, process and technology. And I think from my experience and the work that I do day to day, it's the communication. If the agent had have called and said, we're going to look at selling this property, the old guy's died, the daughters want to sell the property, you've been here for 3 years, you've paid the rent on time every month, probably need to start looking for a property. We're mid to late of the year, we're probably going to start to move this property on. I would have said, thank you so much, let me get organised and get out of your hair. But because there was no communication and there was no engagement other than landing the notice on a Friday night at 5 o'clock by email, it just took the wind out of me. And then I tried and I just, until I had the services of Anika Legal, I was desolate. I just didn't know what to do. They literally saved my life on a number of occasions.
That's great. So through that process, you worked with a paralegal at Anika, who's actually in the audience. I was wondering, Danielle, would you be comfortable just sharing a bit about your experience? And so Anika's model requires a paralegal to be assisting every single client. Everything's signed off by a qualified lawyer. But Danielle, maybe you can just say a bit about what you did, your experience, and I guess your view of this, because your view of this situation in the current rental landscape.
Yeah, I guess it was interesting, after seeing, I guess, Joanne's story in the media, it really prompted me to reflect around the situation that she went through. And I guess where I've landed is someone like Joanne, who's so articulate and well together and have got this great job, and if she is being brought down by the system, you were so emotional after that second hearing, understandably, and to see the emotional toll on someone like you who's so put together, I just think, what hope do the rest of us have? I think that's really where I've landed. Very privileged to have supported you through that time in your life, and, to hear you talk and using your experience, which was so traumatic, to help advocate for others. I'm very in awe of you.
Thank you.
Being able to do that. But yeah, I do think that we're at a stage where, in my other job, I work in, homelessness, and I think we're very sort of conditioned to see, people sleeping rough on the streets and think like, that would never be me. They've made decisions that have led them there, which is, we know is not the case, but that's the general consensus, among the media and mainstream sort of thinking. And I guess Joanne's story really highlights that that's not the case. We're seeing huge changes. 10 years ago, if I was applying for properties in the private rental market for a single mum, it was a numbers game. I could at least, apply for 20, 30 properties, and I'd know it might not be the perfect offer, but I'd be able to get an offer to somebody. Whereas to see you go through that and apply for so many properties and go to so many inspections, and have to leverage these relationships, and for it to be so long for you to get a house that was suitable for you and your family, I think that's just really reflective of a broken system.
Thank you, Danielle, and thank you also for volunteering for Anika. That is such a powerful story. I want to throw to Erin next. That's an example of dispute resolution sort of not going very well. Can you contextualize that, please? Because you've got some really great research on this, and I know that your recent report looks at exercising rights as being something that renters have the lowest confidence in.
Yeah. The thing I really take from this story is that dispute resolution matters. It's so important that we get it right. Because moving is a stressful process. Renting is a stressful process, but it's the dispute resolution piece from the internal dispute resolution, the point when you're contacting your agent and trying to negotiate and talk things through. If that works well, you don't even need the next step in the escalation, but you need all parts of that, from VCAT to RDRV to working with an agent, to work well and support you in a really stressful time. The stakes are really high. They really matter. So look, I spend a lot of my time we look across markets at the Consumer Policy Research Centre. I'm lucky that I get to work on dispute resolution issues from financial services, telecommunications, and we look at how the rental market is going. We just released this report. It's so important because it helps us understand the health of the system. We're calling it the Rental Confidence Index. With support from Consumer Affairs Victoria, this wouldn't be possible without CAV's backing. What we've done is we've asked 1,000 Victorians, a representative sample of people who rent, well, do you know the law? Have you had a problem? Do you feel confident taking action if you have a problem? And overall, what's the impact of renting on you? Does it make you healthier? Does it make you more stressed? There's little bits of good news in this. I don't want to lose what's working. 1 in 6 Victorians in the private rental market say that they're pretty confident. They have a score. We've got this index from 0 to 100. 100 is the perfect score, no issues, you're fully confident, you know your rights. 1 in 6 have a score over 90, which tells you that's pretty good. But there's a long tail. And actually the people who are having the most challenges in the market, they're parents who rent. And
so is 90 the goal? Or
90 tells us that someone knows the law and they can use it. They feel confident using it, that they can back themselves, and renting's not causing them major distress or stress. That's how we see it. We deliberately did this in field just before RDRV was introduced. It gives us a benchmark of what was wrong here. And one of the things we found is the lowest scores were people's confidence using the law. Victoria's got Australia leading laws. They're not perfect, but they're very good. They're getting better. But what we need combined with that is people feeling that they can make a complaint and trust the system, that there won't be negative consequences. We found that just shy of 8 in 10 people, or 4 in 5, had a problem with their rental. 52% actually did something about it. So already half of the people who have a complaint, they're too scared to act. And often for really good reasons. They've had a terrible experience in the past. They're worried about evictions, even though they're banned now. They've had that experience in the past and they carry that with them. We also found that 4% of people with a complaint make it to CAV. Those that do have a pretty good experience, just 2% were making it to VCAT. So that tells you that there's this huge lump of unresolved problems. People don't feel confident raising their voice and getting things resolved. And those that do are struggling. Getting it right really, really matters. I couldn't put it better than Joanne's story.
Thanks, Aaron. So I guess what you've seen in this report looks at, as like exercising rights is an issue. Do you get a sense of how common this is beyond, a situation like this? Is that something that you managed to get data on?
Look, we definitely got a sense that there are widespread problems. And actually what most people are doing are just going, oh gosh, I'm not going to take the complaint. They're not confident enough. They don't have the support. They don't have their Anika angels in their corner. They fear a repercussion, or they know it's going to take significant stress and time. And I actually think, Joanne, your story backs that finding. These worries aren't ungrounded. They're quite fair and founded. People are worried of all these soft consequences. There's some great law reform that's coming that for me, it's like, oh no, this could really make a difference. Standardized forms. People are really aware it's not just about the risk of being removed from your current rental. People are worried about that. They're worried about the reference to get their next rental. And that's hanging over their head every time. They're worried about even raising a complaint about a repair. Hey, that process felt really unfair to me. Oh, you haven't responded to my email in 90 days. These are really common. There again, I don't want to focus entirely on the negative. There are some things that are working. We also did a survey with landlords, because it's actually really important to understand, how does the industry work? Are they prepared to comply with the law? Do they understand what their obligations are? Are they prepared to take complaints? We found that landlords who have agents are more likely to know the law. That's a good sign. They're less likely to have an unresolved complaint. There's work to do. 66% of agents, or 66% of people who rent, said they had a good relationship with their agent. More said they had a good relationship if they worked directly with their landlord. And the way we've interpreted that, because the results almost flip when we look at people who don't work with an agent as landlords, they're less likely to know the law, they're more likely to have complaints. I think there's something about the communication style that we've got going in the agent market where it doesn't work. It can be really blunt and abrupt and miss the humanity. Being asked to leave your home is really rough. It comes with consequences. It comes naturally with worries. Heart palpitations, I think, are a really ordinary reaction, to one of the most stressful things in your life. So there's room to think about how can this system better communicate with people and recognize the humanity that we all have in dealing with these big, scary moments in our lives.
And everything that you said about fear of negative or retaliation, negative consequences, and like that's stuff that we see at Anika all the time. But it's good to hear it from you, who CPRC has a bit of a balcony view. The people that come to Anika are usually renters in the midst of a tenancy dispute. So I guess it suggests that what we're seeing is actually fairly representative.
Big culture of fear in renting.
Jacob, I'd love to ask you. So,
is this working? Oh, is that why I've got a lapel mic? You can hear me? All right, cool. I don't know why I was so special that I got a lapel. They didn't trust me with the handheld. Yeah.
So, dispute resolution. There are issues. It's part of those issues occur at VCAT, but also part of it is because of the relationship at the agent and landlord stage as well. I think what Erin is saying is that it's widespread. So this is really, it's not just a few bad people sort of thing. It's more of like a system or a culture issue that, and we need to change that. At least that's the constructive thing to focus on, in my opinion. So please share the industry perspective on, dispute resolution, exercising rights. Yeah.
Do you mind if I come by a circuitous route there? Thank you, Joanne, for sharing your experience, and I'm really sorry that that was your experience. There's so much, I think, contained within your entire experience by the sounds of things. So I don't know the details of the outstanding maintenance items, etc. But your story, I think, is in some ways like a perfect exemplar of how the system, and when I say the system, I don't mean the regulatory environment. I don't mean the relationship between rental provider and renter, or as agent, as a mediator or moderator. I mean the entire system is broken. And it really boils down to something bigger. This is the kind of stuff that Noel and I have spoken about, right? It sits at a level where it's burnt into the psyche of Australians, a sense of entitlement around owning homes, right? And this is a narrative that continues to be perpetuated by every single politician that stands up on a stage or in front of a camera every single day, where they talk about this intrinsic right to own a home. Now, aspirationally, I've got no issues with that whatsoever, right? It's the Australian dream. But the brutal reality of the world that we live in today is that of the 7 million renters across Australia, 60% of them will never own a home, and that number is only increasing year on year. And there is nothing that any government, federal or state, is willing to do to genuinely tackle that problem. As a result, we have always thought of renting as this transient phase, right? You finish school and you move out with some mates, you go to uni, you get your degree, you get a job, you find someone you like, you move in with that person, you rent a place for that period of time, then you buy a home and you're on the property journey, right? As a result, we've got a regulatory system that is designed for transient, for impermanence. As a result, renters are, despite all of the efforts of people in the room here and across Australia to combat this, are considered second-class citizens. So we have to change the psychology that we have across Australia about renting, about what long-term and lifelong renting looks like, and that, in a way, if we can achieve that, we can destigmatise that. We can design rules that and regulatory environments and systems that support renters, because so much of what sits in here and everything related around it, from agent behaviours through to owner behaviours through to renter behaviours, is dictated by a system that's fundamentally broken, right? So really, the major issue with Joanne's situation, as far as I can tell, is that she couldn't find somewhere else to live, right? That's where the trauma comes from. This desperation. All of a sudden, she's about to be homeless and she can't find somewhere to live. Now, the reason she can't find somewhere to live is because we don't have enough rental properties in the system. That's it. Competition is so fierce. There are too few homes available. In Australia, we have 90% of the rental homes provided by private landlords. That's not non-institutional investors. And they are incentivised in a different way. We have commodified owning homes to such an extent that they make decisions often purely on the economics. So over the course of the last 5 years in Victoria, despite the fact that the government's done incredible work to strengthen, supported by people in this room, to improve the protections and the standards that sit around renters, what that's translated into is an exodus of rental providers out of the system. As a result, this fear, I said to Erin, I love this report, by the way. I would have loved to have known what the confidence index looked like in 2019, right? It would be fantastic to know, because I would bet you money it would be higher than it is today, despite the fact that the context from a regulatory perspective is much more protective and supportive of renters than it was in 2019. And that is because it is dog eats dog out there. It is so fierce for competition the competition is so fierce out there to get a rental property that someone like Joanne, right? This isn't the person we think of when we think that people are struggling to find a rental home. Someone that can pay $1,000 a week for a rental property. Someone who's a senior executive, who's well regarded, who's articulate, who can navigate the complexities of the systems. That's anyway. What do we think of VCAT and RDRV? The agents and the rental providers share some of the concerns that renters have with regards to the operational mechanism and efficacy of.
And I'll also say, feel free to extend that not just to those formal, like VCAT, RDRV, but also just general dispute resolution.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. God, I've spoken a lot. I apologise. I tend to waffle on. So, if you boil it back to the relationship, right? I think property managers in particular feel like they've been put in an adversarial position with renters. And property managers also feel like they're in an adversarial relationship with a lot of their rental providers as well.
And why is that?
Yeah. Well, part of it is this increasing pressure around everyone that's within the system, right? So we've had this incredible period of the pandemic during which everyone was stressed, everyone was tense and anxious about what was going to happen, what was going to, are we going to be evicted? How are we going to pay rent? I don't have a job anymore. Rental providers have got mortgages on those properties. Like, how am I going to pay my mortgage? If the renter can't pay the rent, I can't pay the mortgage. I'm going to lose the property. So the tension went off the charts, and at the same time, the expectations around property managers and their availability and accessibility also went off the charts. So people started working outside of normal hours. They started working from home, started responding to email inquiries and calls at 9 o'clock at night and 6 o'clock on a Sunday morning, Saturday afternoons, etc. And that expectation around accessibility has remained for property managers coming out of the pandemic as well. That dynamic has changed. They tended to act as mediators, negotiators, psychologists, support workers for either side of that relationship throughout that period. And that has continued on and amplified, I think, as the supply of homes to the rental market has weakened. The rents have gone up, and the entire climate is the temperature is a lot hotter than it was 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah. Erin, do you have something to add?
I've got data.
Look, I want to yes, but some of the points that Jacob's making. You can't discount that, competition in the rental market is causing some of these harms. But so the survey we did of landlords, there's a stat in there that scares me. around a quarter of Victorian landlords spend $500 or less on repairs and maintenance per year. And there's this real expectation. There's this group of landlords. There are some amazing landlords. I was really delighted to see this. There was this cohort of people that I was like, yes, I want to rent from them. They'll fix the oven when it breaks. They're prepared. They know that they're offering an essential service. But there's a group that they got into this market not expecting to offer an essential service. They want a no worries, no cost investment. We don't need more landlords full stop. We need more good landlords. We need more landlords who are prepared to think of what they're doing as offering the most essential service, which is a home. And not a landlord that's going to argue with their property manager when the oven breaks because they can't afford to fix it or they don't think it's their job to fix it. That makes everyone in the system's job more stressful. We've also seen, the other kind of like thought I will leave here is about how do we help people be better landlords? It's a really odd way into this debate, but again, something that shocked me in our data, 40% of people who we spoke to as landlords didn't intend to become landlords. They didn't buy that as an investment property. They inherited it. They were lucky enough that they partnered up with someone and they both had properties and suddenly one can become a rental. They were the least prepared to be landlords. They didn't know the law. They more likely had outstanding complaints, and they're more likely to tell us that they'll sell up in the next 3 years because this isn't going to cost what we thought it cost. They're the group that are, worried about spending too much on repairs. They have this really unbalanced expectation of what it is to be a landlord and to offer a home. We need to work on lifting the knowledge and expectations in this cohort because that helps property managers, that helps people who rent. And we also need to say to some of them, maybe you're not right to offer this service.
I want to ask Jacob one follow-up question about that. So, what we're agreeing on here is that there are, the agent has a role to play to make sure that the landlord is being a responsible essential service provider, right? Like these people who have accidentally become landlords have accidentally become essential service providers. It's kind of like, you imagine like if someone accidentally became a water company that provided water. So it's like it's a really serious responsibility that they have. But in this, the data you referred to in your report said that renters had a more positive response on average, more positive relationship on average directly with the landlord, and also fewer unresolved issues. So can you kind of make that make sense?
We went into the weeds on the detail here, and look, part of it is because the sampling, we couldn't include international landlords in our survey, so there's a nerdy sampling reason. But I actually think it's because how landlords communicate with their tenants, and your story is probably perfect here, Joanne. It's someone who is renting directly from their landlord, they're probably less likely to get something that complies with the current law, but they're more likely to get a human response. Agents know the law, they're acting procedurally, they're doing, sometimes they are. I can see some advocates in the room who see some behaviour that shouldn't happen. But, they're sending the notices, but they're not thinking about the humanity. They don't necessarily have the time to always think about the humanity. But when it really goes wrong, I think that's where this hits. Do you want to add anything there, Joanne?
No, you covered it.
Jacob, you mentioned that there's behavioural change needed across renters, landlords and agents. What do you think is the most important behavioural change that we want to see from agents that would address some of these things?
From agents?
Yeah.
Erin hits on an interesting point there. I can still be heard, yes? Yeah, okay, apologies. Around the cohort of rental providers that we want in the system. Similarly, we want a cohort of property managers that are aligned to that and capable of functioning alongside in partnership with rental providers like that and renters out there. There's been massive churn in the sector over the past 4 or 5 years. We're infamous for having low barriers to entry and having what's this, turnstile? A turnstile? Yes, that's the expression, the turnstile of people in and out. I'm sure renters in the room have been through the process of having 3 or 4 property managers in the course of a 2 or 3 year tenancy. That's because it's a tough job, right? It is a challenging job, and ultimately, it's an oft said thing within the sector. You're a focal point for complaints. The only time you're ever talking to someone, it's bad news as a property manager. You don't get, other than a leasing consultant who goes, congratulations, you've got the property. That's about the one sort of bright spark in a property manager's life. The rest of the time is, we've got a problem with the property. They go to the owner, sorry, you've got to spend some money because the hot water service has gone kaput. Sorry, renter, your rent is going up because the owner wants the rent to go up. There's no good news stories in there. So it's a challenging role. So it's hard to attract people that are capable of, having the human element and have the luxury of time too, because, ultimately these are businesses that are being run too, and these people are paid to manage significant workloads as well. So routine, process, being mechanical or robotic in terms of the way they interact with people is often, as Erin's highlighted there, the only means by which you can actually action the items, the workload that is sitting on you.
So it's like the nature of the job will need to change so that we can attract a different person that better fills this agent of an essential service provider.
Yeah, look, I think technology will solve some of these things, and that's been the promise of prop tech for a long time, that would provide more time for property managers to do the human component of the role. That hasn't been realised yet. Like a lot of us, I don't think that we've really enjoyed that much productivity gains from technology as yet. But I think it comes back to this point here around the type of owner of the property, the type of property, the way it's maintained. And if a property manager had more autonomy, for instance, right, to make the decisions about what happens within a property, the experience for a renter would be radically different, right? And that's because the imperative isn't economic, right? It's about providing a good rental experience. But the brutal reality is, and this is what we celebrate the introduction of RDRV. One, obviously, because it's a means by which we can resolve disputes more quickly, but it's a third party saying to an owner, you have to do this, right? Because a property manager will say routinely to a lot of owners, you've got to get this maintenance done. Like or you don't have a claim on this bond, and the owner will go, you work for me, go and get it back. Go get the bond back, or I'm not paying for that. Just string them out. And they're in this point of conflict where they're trying to fulfil the requirements of the regulation and deliver a great rental experience.
All right. Well, look, and speaking of RDRV, I'll move on to the next point, which is the report that Anika Legal released on Thursday last week. This report was called Unrepresented, and it looked at. It was funded by the Victorian Legal Services Board and Commissioner to explore two things. The first was the experience of renters self-representing at VCAT. This was before RDRV had been announced. That got announced halfway through the project, and so we adjusted the project so we could also collect some data on that. It was also exploring the impact of legal support on a renter's capability to self-represent themselves at VCAT and RDRV. And so we supported 158 renters through these two dispute resolution systems. And what we found, like the headline was pretty simple. It was that where there are disputes between a tenant and their landlord, there's a real power imbalance, and the systems, as it stands, do not sufficiently correct for it. At VCAT, renters reported confusing systems that don't work, an uneven playing field when it came to both knowledge and the costs, financial and non-financial, and procedures and poor case management processes that could be exploited by an agent who would choose to try to delay the case and wear them down. So sort of open to that kind of abuse. Some similar types of issues were reported at RDRV, but I think the big thing that we found at RDRV was that almost all the renters facing bond claims at RDRV were pressed to make a settlement and make an offer before any evidence was provided by the landlord, and that's quite concerning because bonds is an area where the burden of proof is on the landlord, and so they're the one who needs to provide the evidence to to actually claim the bond. Where you have renters not being told that, and then also asked to make an offer before they see any evidence, it is like they're being steered towards acting against their own interests. And so, more positively, the report also found that when renters get basic legal support, and especially where the VCAT processes are explained and simplified, confidence and outcomes both dramatically improve. And the recommendations we make to do this, they're relatively low-cost fixes. So we make these practical recommendations around redesigning VCAT's processes and practices with renters more in the centre, more in mind, and then providing renters with legal support to both resolve their issue and build their legal capability so that they can independently resolve these disputes in the future. Kind of like how Joanne said, you know, she would feel confident to have another go if it was a similar issue. That was the report, you know, in a nutshell. Joanne, I would love to ask you, you know, you read the report, and yeah, I guess, like, how does it make you feel? Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it makes me feel like I'm not alone. Like, you know, it's not only me that is facing this, you know, tenancy situation. It highlighted for me the importance of Anika Legal and the angels that, you know, walked me through the process step by step. And that, you know, if I had to go through it again, I sort of would be okay, but, you know, I'd be referring back to all of my notes and the briefing and all of the content that I was given. Yeah.
What do you know, you've gone through this experience, then you see the report which shows that this is the experience of others. And it's like, as a renter, what do you want? Like, what would be the thing that would make you feel like, okay, this was fair? Yeah.
Yeah, so I acknowledge, as being a homeowner and a landlord previously, I acknowledge that it's not my home that I'm living in, and that the owner has a right to either approve or not the repairs, you know, to a point from a safety perspective. I also feel, you know, I acknowledge that they also have an opportunity to sell the home whenever they wish. What I would like, and having read the report, I think a lot of tenants would feel the same, is more open and honest communication, just some authenticity through the industry. You know, as I said, just giving me the heads up, we're going to sell the property, you probably need to look at finding something else mid-year somewhere. You know, the trust and relationship between the agent on behalf of the owner has to be there. You can't be landing a notice on Friday night with 60 days with a single mother of 3 children in a 4x2. It's just not possible. It's just not possible. So I just think open and honest communication and some authenticity, regardless of policy and legal, just some humanistic elements would be really great.
And yeah, I think the quotes that came through in the report really emphasised that, like, what would have made a big difference was that human element, and just, like, I guess, acting in a way which preserved dignity in this experience. I will say, Joanne, I think, you know, that's where we're at, and that is what we need right now. But I believe that we can set our sights higher, because, you know, a couple of things that you mentioned about it's the landlord's home, and they ultimately have the right to, you know, deny the repairs. I think that's part of the belief that needs to change. Like, it's the landlord's investment property. It's not their home. It's your home. It's the renter's home. And that's actually pretty normal in a lot of countries. There are many countries that have open-ended leases. Renters are able to make changes to the property because they're going to be in there for, you know, 15 years. If the owner wants to sell the property, they can do that, but the tenancy is going to continue, because a home isn't, you know, even if we get to long-term leases, a home isn't somewhere that you can rely on for 3 or 5 years and then might have to change schools for your kids or something. Like, a home is something that you can build your life around, you can plan for the future. And I think this is a really, you know, like, this discussion around what do we believe about renting? What is the narrative? That's something that needs to shift. In my opinion, the most important thing that needs to shift before we can, you know, everyone can come to the table thinking about these things, and saying, yeah, if we want this next generation of, well, if we want Australia, like an entire generation of Australians, to understand what it feels like to have a home, like we need to expect more, and we need to change the way that we think about housing. So, thanks, Nadia. I will. Look, I'll ask Jacob. I think you read. Did you read the report?
Yep.
Yeah, great. So we'd just love your take on it generally. Yeah.
Yeah, look, concerning, I suppose, some of the experiences highlighted there. There is an intrinsic power imbalance, right? That's inescapable, I think. When you know, everything that we've already spoken about, but when you professionalise dispute resolution, the people that do it all the time have got an advantage, right? Mm-hmm. So that's it's inescapable, I think, is that someone that is coming into the system for the first time, whether that's VCAT, whether that's RDRV, is not going to have the ability to navigate the intricacies, the complexities, the nuances of those systems in a way that someone who has, you know, is a veteran of those ecosystems or infrastructures will be. A lot of you know, back to Joanne and Erin's comments and yours as well, like a lot of these situations could have been avoided, you know, if there was that human element. Absolutely. I'm not here to defend a class of, you know, whether that's rental providers or agents, you know, but there is this system, again, not to labour the point, is mired in problems, right? It's mired in an inability to communicate in the way that we would hope we'd be able to communicate. Like, it's so laden with emotion and angst and other factors, time constraints, complexities of regulations, regulatory change that's come at a massive rate, which, you know, property managers need to contend with and owners need to be educated on. They still don't understand their expectations, even the good ones. And I'd say for all of the fantastic, you know, relationships between what I call a private landlord, the person that self-manages their property, right? Overwhelmingly, they are non-compliant properties, right? So even though everything's, you know, great and cushy between the two, those renters are living in properties that do not meet minimum standards more often than they are when they're managed by a professional. That's a side point. But ultimately, the aspiration of getting to this point where we have the kind of communication and the ability to resolve these things before they get to RDRV or before they get to VCAT, you know, requires that systemic change that we've been talking about, that psychology shift as well.
And look, I'm in agreement that we are, like, the system is mired in problems and we are taking action to address some of those things. I want to ask Erin, because, you know, you see systems, you see a variety of systems where they got essential services at least much more right than in renting and housing. So I guess, what is the difference? What, you know?
For people who haven't heard me rant and rave about this, I love dispute resolution. One of my other hats that I wear, I'm on the board of the Financial Ombudsman, AFCA. It's not a perfect system. No dispute resolution system I can point to in Australia or overseas is perfect, but I will say it's a little bit better than where we're at in renting. RDRVs, I'm really excited about the potential for it, but what I worry about is, and it came through so strongly in the Anika report, conciliation and mediation as a tool in a power imbalance, when you've got professional people turning up again and again and again and know the system and know what to do and know what to ask for. You've got to use conciliation and mediation really carefully in that context. Otherwise, you end up with a split the baby situation. Landlord wants 1,000, you say 0, pay 500. We call that a good outcome. And it's really not in the context of renting. Keep in mind, most people are too scared to complain. The people who are managing to make it to RDRV now are still carrying with them a lot of fear. They're still really worried. I think it'll only be the people who are brave enough and bold enough and in a tough enough situation that they've made it there. I'm really pleased to hear about the speed improvements, but if you conciliate without that context, you can end up with some really poor outcomes. And I think that's the thing to keep an eye on and keep working on, as well as to think about how do we pick up the systemic issues? How do we pick up the frequent flyer, dodgy agent or dodgy landlord who has 10 properties and none of them meet minimum standards and constantly has complaints? How do we pick that up in data? How do we get regulators working on it? How do we have great public reporting that tells us how things are improving? I think RDRV's, it's got some foundations there, but I'd love to see it build and grow on those things.
Yeah, and like I can't overstate how big the fear element is, because in this report that we did, we found that it was 4 in 5 renters feel anxious about representing against a real estate agent who's a professional. 4 in 5 lack the confidence to apply and prepare and speak at VCAT. 4 in 5 fear retaliation from their landlord or agent. And so you've got all of these things that are playing such a huge role and are just terrifying when it comes to, if something goes wrong, I might be homeless, my family might be homeless. Like that's what renters are dealing with, and you can imagine how much that will affect decision making, willingness to stand up for your rights, and so on. I'm going to. There was one case in the report which I just want to read out, and then ask all of you some questions on it. So this was a case. The client's name was Hassan. He was a newly arrived migrant renting a home with his wife and 3 children. His daughter had a serious medical condition and the house had no heating through winter. He begged the agent to fix it. They didn't. He had no choice but to move out. And that's where things started to go wrong. The rental provider made a bond claim against him. VCAT ordered them to send Hassan their application and evidence, and they didn't. VCAT took 500 days, nearly a year and a half, just to strike out that claim. When Hassan then asked for his bond back, the rental provider simply lodged a new VCAT application to stop it. VCAT again told them to send paperwork. Again, they didn't. It took 120 more days for VCAT to follow up, and only after Hassan had sent multiple unanswered emails. He finally received their evidence 780 days after the original claim, so that's more than 2 years. The first hearing was listed almost 1,000 days after he'd left the property, and Hassan only found out because VCAT emailed him an order granting the agent an adjournment. He hadn't even been told the hearing was happening. VCAT relisted the case nearly 1,100 days after he'd moved out. Then 3 business days before the hearing, the agent asked for another adjournment. Hassan didn't know if he was meant to show up. He took time off work anyway, picked up his son early from school, went. The agent didn't show up. VCAT finally ordered the bond to be repaid. But 2 days later, the rental provider applied to reopen the case. Hassan asked VCAT to dismiss it and to compensate him for 3 years of stress, time, cost, and confusion. At the final hearing, the member granted the reopening on the spot, told Hassan he could file a separate claim if he wanted compensation, meaning come back again, 3 years and 3 months after this started. In the end, final orders about his bond were made 1,200 days, more than 3 years after Hassan had left the property. And that is, I think that's ridiculous, but from what my case team tells me, that happens. It's not that's not extraordinary. And I raise this because I guess this is what happens where you have stakes that are completely different and a system which can be gamed even a little bit. Then whoever it's less bad for, if the system doesn't work, they might just do it to gain a tactical advantage. And so maybe Jacob, I'll start with you. A situation like this, obviously this is not happening all the time, but it is happening, and it's we need to stop that kind of stuff happening. So what is needed to stop that kind of stuff happening? Obviously there are changes that could be done at VCAT, but I guess from the agent's perspective, the real estate institute perspective, what do you think?
I keep saying the same thing over again, and I apologise. There's flaws in the system. I'd certainly say that is the exception rather than the rule. In defence of VCAT, I think they get it right overwhelmingly in the majority of instances, rather than have egregious examples like that. that's bad people, plain and simple, right? Like that is categorically could not fit more into the segment of people that should not be rental providers, that should never have been in that situation. Plain and simple, because that is the most cynical, nasty, horrifying example of someone exploiting that power imbalance and that dynamic. Because I would bet you $1 million to a minty that the $2,500, $3,000, whatever dollars that bond represented meant nothing to that person, right? Because they could afford for 3 years not to have it in their pocket. So, and that is like this, I know I keep coming back to this point, the psychology of people. We have created a culture where we fetishize becoming a property investor, right? Because they've been told that it's been valorized so much. It's the pathway to economic security later on in life. So everyone pursues it relentlessly, continues to pursue it relentlessly. And that attracts, and then we've built a taxation system that rewards it, right? And, you know, obviously that point I made about the regulatory system that sits behind the renting system is a byproduct of that. But it attracts the wrong people to the system. And that is a person problem. That's not a system problem.
And so a question to all three of you, or any three of you, what, like in this situation, what should happen to the person who's doing the wrong thing? What seems like a fair thing to happen to someone who is, admittedly at the extreme end, who's just like gaming the system?
So I agree this is a bad person problem, but the system needs to respond to this. If I think about how complaints work in other, in ombuds systems, and I realise that's not what we have here, but one of the mechanisms there is that the longer a complaint runs, particularly if it's being dragged out and escalated by the people who know the system really well, the more it costs the industry player. There's no incentive to settle. There's no incentive to deal with this. If anything, there's rewards. So we need to figure out, how do our complaint systems recognise this? Part of this starts with tracking. Do we have good data to know this agent is the one that runs these cases all the time? Not just the great data that exists in community legal centres, because you know who these people are, you see them all the time. But we need it at our DRV, we need it at VCAT. We also need to be able to track landlords through this. We don't really have a good idea of who is a rental provider or a landlord in Victoria. There's no number, there's no licence. You need to be licensed to, I think, beekeeping, someone told me, but you don't have to be licensed to offer a rental property. So if you don't know who people are, you can't then have a system that has consequences for them when they abuse it. So it starts with, let's figure out who they are. Let's figure out what the consequences are, what penalties they pay for absolutely taking advantage of the system. This is costing government as much as it is, people who rent. All of the systems and supports, every CLC will probably feel this case and be like, yep, I've turned up to that again and again, and I've lost lawyer time on these ridiculous cases. It's costing us all, except for the person who's causing the problem. And we've got to find a consequence.
I'd agree with Erin that, I tell my teenage boys that behaviour has consequences, good and bad. And I think if we can track the data, then we should use it for guidelines and rules, really, that there's an expectation that a case should take so long, and when it's not, then it needs review. But the amount of complaints and emails that I've sent to government persons about my case and about, the way that I was treated, and I just simply don't get a response. We just don't have our finger on the pulse with what's happening in the industry.
So it sounds like like a registration system for landlords and agents, and not to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like disqualification or these sorts of penalties for the very worst. Is that something that you?
I've never put this as a recommendation in a report, but yes. There you go. You've heard it here first. I think it starts. One of the things I'm worried about, and you probably see this, Jacob, is that a landlord that is doing the wrong thing and is really pushing an agent to never repair things, always take the bond claim, at some point a great agent is going to go, no, I'm not going to work with you, and they'll jump again and again and again and again. We really need to track these people through the system, and we really need to have a conversation about what the minimum expectation is if you are providing an essential service. We do this with energy companies and water companies and banks all the time, and I really do value my electricity, but I value my home more. We need to have some equivalent systems and protections here that help us monitor and act on bad behaviour. It could be a range of things. It could be go to an education course because you clearly don't understand what the law is and what you're meant to be doing. That'd be a great start. It could be penalties. It also is a way that we can empower our regulators. It's really hard to regulate in the dark if you don't know who's causing the problems.
And I guess on that point, we do have penalties. So Victoria has the rental task force. They and they have been issuing penalties for landlords and agents doing the wrong thing. I think this is a positive step.
Yeah.
Do we think that is enough, or is that helpful in comparison to something like this, where you are tracking all landlords? Because I think last time I checked, maybe the last like four months ago, the amount of fines that Rental Task Force had handed out I was somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million, and that's, you know, looking at the penalties, that's really the tip of the iceberg. That might be just the stuff that Anika sees is worth getting a penalty. And so, there's a question of like, how effective is this regulatory mechanism, and then also how much do we have to do it for it to be effective?
Yeah. Look, I fully endorse in the RAIV. So on the other side of the the sales, the real estate spectrum sales, is we've advocated and continue to advocate for, rather than these $11,000 penalties for every infraction, is this driver's license system, effectively, whereby there are proportionate responses on a spectrum, and people lose their license. They lose their livelihood when they continue to, when they have 6 demerit points or 12 demerit points or whatever it is, when they've infracted that many times, they get suspended or they lose it for good. Yeah. And the same could exist on the rental side of things for agents and for landlords. Yeah. Right now, that's a really complex and hard thing to bring to life, I imagine. But you could start with the agents, right? Whereby when they see the end of this process is me not being able to work anymore, right? That shifts. You'll have more and more people say, I won't manage your property, right? I won't manage it if you don't get this done. I won't manage it if you continue to, vexatiously pursue a bond that, then I won't work for you. And that will force people, again, to Erin's point, they bounce around. Ultimately, you have to hold the person responsible, because I can tell you, this is no joke. There are no property managers in Victoria that don't want to do maintenance on a property, get maintenance done on a property. There are no property managers, unless they are sadistic, unwell people, that want to have an argument about a bond. They want to give the bond back. The person that's saying don't give the bond back owns the property, right? That is the absolute brutal truth of this situation. And unless they have some accountability in this process, then they will continue to find ways around that. They'll find the people that won't be compliant, that won't subscribe to the regulation.
Okay, thank you very much. Joanne, was there anything that you wanted to add before we go? We're going to go to audience questions soon.
Only just that I think there also needs to be accountability for the renters as well. As we're making, owners and agents accountable, then renters also need to be, for holding up their end of the bargain as well, paying the rent, maintaining the property, allowing access. It's only fair.
All right. Yes, questions from the audience. Yep, we've got one up the front. Harry?
Hi there. Thank you for telling your story. I've spoken to many people who've gone through the same thing. It's very frustrating. I could talk for hours about stories I've had that are similar to yours and are really heartbreaking. What I wanted to ask was, there seems to be, part of the conversation seems to be that we've abolished no-fault evictions. I don't think when someone who is being evicted because of the landlord passing away, selling the property, or even raising the rent to the point where people cannot afford the rent, that is an eviction just by another name, but it is of no fault to the renter. So why do we keep talking about no-fault evictions being abolished in Victoria when they are clearly alive and well, and I speak to renters every day, not at fault, who are being evicted.
Yeah, look, I can speak to this one, and I agree with you. In August, I went travelling as part of my Westpac Social Change Fellowship. Went to the US and Europe, spoke with some people, some just, renters in my situation. And I guess like for that whole trip, there were like the things that really stuck out were there were these moments where I would explain how things worked, and there would be this moment of like the person listening would be like, wait, are you serious? Like this like flabbergasted, like that's how things work. This happened 3 times. One of them was when I told them the area that we're staying at, which was, I booked the wrong area. The other 2 were when I told them about that we have both the negative gearing and capital gains tax discount, like both in operation. And the other was saying that in Australia, in the majority of jurisdictions, you can get evicted for no reason. And in all the jurisdictions, there are ways to, like, let's say, constructively evict someone. And there was this moment of like, oh my God, like that's how you're living. And I think, we're in Australia, we're attuned to how things are. And so this might not seem that like outrageous. And, Joanne, your comment was sort of like to that effect, saying like, oh, well, it is like, it's not our home. But I think we don't get to a true home until we say that as a renter, it's your home and you can live there for as long as you choose, unless you seriously breach the lease agreement. Like it's up to you. And like, that's the only way that you can like plan your future and like invest in the community and do all of these other things. And I think what that needs to look like, quite simply, is there are no evictions which the landlord can impose on you unless you're in serious breach. So if they want to sell, that's fine, but they need to continue it with the tenancy. So yeah, that's my view. Feel free to.
Yes, agree. How much discretion there is about who someone offers a rental to. I'm not asked about my family status when I go to get an electricity plan. I don't need to disclose my pets to my telco. I recognize that, owning a property comes with these deep expectations and, oh gosh, what will happen? Will the clause hit my floorboards? But that's what bond is for. The fact that I really suspect that parents have a real tough time in the rental market is because so many landlords don't want to rent to parents who pay their rent on time, who are fantastic tenants, who are super responsible. But there's this sense that they get to choose that. And I really think that there's time to think through, well, why? Why do we make it so hard for someone to get a rental as well as the exit process?
All right, so a couple of questions up the front.
Hello, I'm Lisa Julian, ex-public servant, ex-Property Council of Australia, so I see all sides of this, by the way. Thank you very much for your comments. They have been really illuminating. And Joanne, I'm sorry as all hell that you went through that, because my God. A couple of comments, and Jacob, well done on highlighting the bad rental providers out there. But also, is there a mechanism, maybe Lisa, you're the better person to answer this, around, for example, with the gamification, to put it bluntly, of the whole, going back and forth time and time again for the evidence? Has Anika Legal suggested maybe a 30-day time frame or something along those lines, and a sort of 3 strikes and you're out? I don't know what the answer to this is, but I'd really love your comments on that, because it seems to me that by all accounts is absolutely taking the mickey, and as you said yourself, Erin, it's costing the taxpayer ridiculous amounts of money, and I don't know what the cost is for an actual hearing, and maybe we need to impose a user pay system right at the end for these vexatious litigants. That's just another thought as well. I'd love your comments on that, because I'm really interested in how we go about changing that psychology, as you've said, Jacob, and also making it a better system for all. Thank you.
Look, I might start the answer and we'll through. So I think, on the evidence requirements, there's sort of like 2 parts to that. One is pre-VCAT, and the Victorian government has brought in the evidence requirements to make a bond claim. So I think there is positive movement in this area, and recognising that where there is demonstrated dodgy claims, dodgy bond claims, or things of that sort, you just need to introduce the evidence requirements to make sure that you're not getting baseless claims. At the evidence requirements at VCAT, there are those time limits. And one of the things that one of the findings in the report is that those time limits are really often not enforced. So, like in this situation, they lapse and there is nothing done. And so I think that's an area where proactive case management and introducing some sort of repercussion if you don't do that thing, for example, 3 strikes and you're out, or something along those lines, would go a long way to making sure that people weren't, partaking in procedural gamesmanship, to be honest. Did anyone have anything to add to that?
Look, it's another yes, and also guidance and rules from the regulator. Victoria is far and above exceeding when it comes to rental system and protections. But in WA, there's something very cool happening. They have a magistrates court rather than a tribunal, but they're running some complaints through their commissioner. And that commissioner is going to have the ability to issue guidance on things like, how old is a carpet before, you can make a bond claim. If the carpet's 10 years old, any damage after that is just fair wear and tear, for example. And being able to put those kind of rules of the road for claims, or even definitions on things like, WA is not going there, but I'd love to see more guidance around what are minimum standards and what do they mean. What does adequate lighting or adequate ventilation mean for most properties? Because agents will struggle with that, landlords and renters. So the more guidance we have on detail, that ideally prevents complaints, but then can help when you get to that pointy end of a complaint to know, no, this is too far. The 10-year-old carpet, we don't need to keep running this complaint for another 1,000 days. Just give the guy the bond back.
Yep. Just from our experience, cannot emphasise how much cost savings there would be if we address some of these things.
Yeah.
There was a question up the front here.
Hi, thanks everyone. I'm wondering.
And could you just say your name and your
sorry, yeah, I should do that. My name's Connie Chen. I'm from Eastern Community Legal Centre. I'm wondering what people think about sort of the human rights framework rather than having this sort of investor-based framework where, I think everyone's sort of dancing around this, basically saying, the investor can sell at any time, but having a human rights framework in terms of a right to housing. And what barriers do you see in terms of changing the culture in that way for us to look at that as a human right?
Yeah, me personally, absolutely. The problem is the system that we have right now and the mix, the makeup of the properties. So there'd need to be a massive correction, an absolutely massive correction to transition into that framework away from the existing framework, because this is an embedded, baked in system that is generations in the making. That's, the CGT and the negative gearing, all of these policies and instruments that have built up around this and like put armour around the way that we have rental systems. The fact that you go overseas and people are like, what? Is a product of decades. So to really transition into that kind of mode of thinking and mode of operating it's astronomical, the requirements to get there. How do we do it? I like, all due respect to CAB and the work they've done, they're trying to move the needle, and they have, but I still maintain that I think things are worse today than they were 5 years ago. And that's a product because so much of this is sentiment, right? And you've got a class of investors, of landlords who feel demonised, who are like, pardon my language, fuck this, I'm out of here, right? And we've lost those systems, those properties out of the system. And it's not a one-for-one, right?
We've lost the landlord, not necessarily the property.
Yeah. You lost them out of the rental system, right? Okay. Now, here's the thing, that the government will say, first home buyers, great. But what we're also seeing is an increase in the size of rental households, right? A byproduct, it bucks the trend of 40 years across the country of decreasing household size. Household size amongst renters is increasing. That's because they can't afford or get access to homes. So where you might have had a couple in a rental, a 2-bedroom apartment before, you're starting to see 2 couples in a rental apartment. Where you used to see 3 people in a 3-bedroom house, you're starting to see 6 people in the same property. So what's happening is every property that comes out of the system because the landlord says, gonna sell, not worth it anymore, there's no money in it, it's too complex, the blah, 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 I don't have any rights, right? They sell the 2-bedroom apartment and a first home buyer buys it, which is great. Not one for one, but they might buy it. First home buyers are single or couples. So those other 2 people are thrown back into the field to compete for one less property, right? And that's continuing to happen. So we need to get more homes into the system. Things like trends like build to rent might be able to solve it. As I was saying this to a couple of people in the audience earlier on, that's still a premium product, right? So it's only catering to a really niche crowd, right? But if we can get build to rent or equivalent institutional investment where they're offering properties that are affordable and increase the number of properties, then I think that it can be part of a solution where we transition into this more of a German system or something like that, whereby the notion of what home is, what renting is, starts to transform over time, where people start to think, yeah, I have rights in this property, I have security of tenure, I can do things within the property, and I'm not a second class citizen.
Yeah, I want to pick up on that because your question around human rights versus, I guess where we're at now, we conceive of housing as an investment, as a commodity, as an asset, and I think where we need to get to, which is housing, you can get there both ways. Of housing is a human right, or also housing is an essential service. The thing they have in common is that it's government's responsibility to make sure that the people have a home. Like in other essential services, where the market isn't working, the government will step in and do the thing, and it might involve spending a lot of money, and that's just the part of, and that's what an essential service is. It's something that we deem so important for the functioning of society, the government will make sure it provides. And I think that's what both of these human rights and essential services conceptions do. It makes sure that we say, all right, well, clearly the market isn't working in housing, and it's not on anyone other than government to make sure that works. To either participate or get involved, regulate or participate. So I think that's where we need to get to. But the thing that's like the thinking behind that I think needs to underlie the change that we make. All right. Any other questions? Cool. I might then, we've got a few more minutes, but I'll just ask one very last quick question to the panel and then we'll wrap up. All right, so we've talked about lots of problems and systemic problems and myriad problems, and I want to ask, what are some of the things that are happening right now that are making you, what are some of the solutions? What do we need? What are the things that are making you hopeful? Because we have discussed that there is much to be excited about and there's much progress. This is such a difficult problem. It's going to take a lot of effort. What are the things that are making you hopeful or excited?
Yeah, for me, it would be the services of the Anika Angels, but also having all of you in the room to be looking at these problems and these issues that I've experienced and trying to fix them. I think it's a really great start to have all of you here, and I thank you also, Erin and Jacob, for contributing. This is a really good start and very heartening for me.
So I'm excited about a lot of stuff. The reform that's coming through in Victoria is great. But actually, I'm really excited that Jacob's here. I just want to recognise that the Real Estate Institute hasn't always been part of these conversations. I think it's, we're not always going to agree with everything, but it's so important to have the conversation and try to understand the perspectives and how we make this system better. How do we unscramble this egg and get to something that actually we have a shared vision for? Renting is good. People feel comfortable and safe and healthy and they have a home. So I think that shift, and that there's so many people who are wearing different government, industry, community sector hats in this room, that tells me that Victoria is heading in the right direction. It's going to be hard, but we're working on it.
Yeah, there's lots to be excited about. I'd echo that. We're working on a long-term project with CPRC, co-chaired by Tenants Victoria, around best practice in property management, and the aim of that project is to define what best practice looks like, and then say this is the standard. Right, and if you're not meeting this, you're not at the standard. Then maybe CAB can do something about getting rid of the people that aren't at the standard after that. Minimum energy efficiency standards / mandatory disclosure of energy efficiency ratings on properties. This is the next hurdle or barrier that needs to be overcome for improving the quality of rental homes, and us realising net zero as a state, as a nation. So that's coming down the pipeline, and that will transform what comfort feels like and within rental homes. And I had one other thing. Heather's in the room. I'm sure she was there, and Tenants Victoria. And there's a round table, and these guys are working on longer term leases, right? And how we can proliferate and message out longer term leases, because ultimately long-term leases are probably the linchpin to one of the critical or cornerstones, I think, of solving this problem. Because when we talk about sense of place, sense of home, that is intrinsically linked to security of tenure. And even if someone needs to break a lease 3 years into a 5-year lease, the fact that they knew that they were safe in the home, that no one was going to sell it from out underneath them, or if they did sell it, that they still had that security of tenure. That if we can do that, we can change the system.
And for mine, a lot of that I'm very excited about. So what I'll share as the thing that I'm really excited about, I think, goes beyond housing justice. To just the ability for people, help seekers, like people in Joanne's situation, to build their own, to be empowered to assert their own rights and get justice. Uphold their rights, but also maintain their dignity in the process. This unrepresented report or project, we had the hypothesis that if we supported renters with the right support at the right time, it would mean we provide them with a dedicated paralegal support person, self-representation service. It would mean that not only could they assert their rights, but in the future they could independently resolve a similar dispute. 77% of our clients said that they could do that. They were confident they could do that. And I see this, and so that's not just housing justice. This is a service that can be rolled out in other areas of law to make sure that people have access to justice broadly. And this is absolutely a key thing, if not the most important thing, in my opinion, to make sure that we have access to justice, because the numbers are not looking good right now. For decades, we've been at about 1 in 5 people get the legal support and access to justice that they need. We're not going to change that by providing more and more services. It's just completely infeasible. And even better than that, the thing that doesn't have that ongoing cost, but also it's just the most empowering, is just giving people the power to actually do it themselves and get to that confidence and that peace of mind where they say, oh, if something happens, that's fine. I'll go and assert my rights. And so this report, and just generally a lot of the work that Anika has done, has really encouraged me and kind of made me optimistic that we can get to a place where people are empowered to do these things, and they just don't need the lawyer in the first place. I think that's where we need to get to. So look, thank you so much to the panel. This has been incredible, and I really appreciate, all three of you have brought, a different perspective and also a different type of courage to this really open conversation. I really appreciate that. Thank you for being so attentive in such a a conversation which is I guess like really complex, really important. So thanks for sticking around for your Tuesday evening. And I just want to thank again Maurice Blackburn, Victoria Legal Services Board, who funded the Unrepresented Project, and also the Office of Consumer Affairs, Lisa Gandolfo, who delivered the speech. Thank you all for making Housing Justice Forum 2025 special again, and I hope everyone can go home and celebrate some of the new reforms that have just come in to strengthen renters' rights. So thank you, everyone.
Yes, well done.